everybody doing today? My name is Nick DiPaolo. I'm going to start up in a couple seconds. We're just going to give everybody a chance to log on. I am a project manager with JMT. Today we're going to be talking about sub-addresses. Title of the presentation is Mind the Gap. Oops, okay, there we go. And the idea is that we're trying to identify missing sub-addresses for next generation 911. A lot of the presentations you've had already have gone into done a great job explaining the basics of 911. And what we hope to do here is to get into a little more detail about some of the issues that come up with sub-addressing, because there's a lot of gaps there that can occur. Like I said, my name is Nick DiPaolo at JNT. I have about 20 years experience with GIS. I'm also a volunteer firefighter for about 18 years. My marketing team made me do this so I blame them for this silly hat, but anyway. And actually I lived in South Carolina for 4 years, and I was on the fire department there, and also provided mutual aid calls to Mecklenburg County, basically the Charlotte area. JMT has worked on, we've worked on several recent 911 projects. I'm not gonna read the whole list here, but basically there's a bunch across the East Coast from Pennsylvania down to Virginia, focusing primarily now on the 911, the next generation 911 projects. I did want to call out one is in particular Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. It's just west of Philadelphia. There's about 300,000 address points there, population about 850,000 people. And we are building that addressing point layer from scratch, starting with parcel centroids, working our way up and to the point now where it's going to be a NENA compliant layer. So I'm preaching to choir here with why next gen is needed. Basically, it's scary as an emergency responder that Grubhub and all these different types of apps can actually find your location and know where you're at better than emergency services. And that's a problem that we're trying all to work hard to resolve. Like I said, we're going to focus on what a sub-address is. And they're a little bit different. NENA refers to them as a unit within a building or a structure. Here's the actual snippet from the NENA standard. A group or suite of rooms within a building that are under common ownership or tenancy, typically having a common primary entrance. They don't always have to have a primary entrance that's shared. For example, on the right, I have just a typical strip mall in anywhere town, USA. The black outline is the parcel. So if you're starting with your parcel centroids to create your addressing point layer, you only get one point for that whole property. In reality, there's multiple units there, and you can see the blue dots represent those subunits. And if you zoom in, you can see it's 70 Buckwalter Road is the primary address. In each of those units, there's a unit number associated with that. A lot of popular examples of sub-addresses would be apartments, shopping centers like we just went through, and office complexes. The important thing to note is that this unit information is not just an additional field in the NENA model. For real accuracy, each unit requires a unique point in your site structure address point layer. And what's interesting is that's not always reflected in your alley. We'll get into that in a minute. I have an example specific that I'd like to show you with that. Actually, got a monitor. Oh, I forgot to mention, I apologize. If you have anything, I have the chat window open. I'm trying to get there. Love virtual conferences where you're managing multiple screens at one time. So bear with me as I try to reopen the chat window here. Catherine, if I can't get to it, just let me know if you see chats. I'm looking and I might have closed it accidentally. But if you had, okay. If anybody has any questions, pose those in the chat room and we'll certainly address them at the end. Again, I'm going to stress this a bunch in my presentation here. As an emergency responder, as a firefighter, I've been on calls where it's tough finding locations, specifically sub-address locations. Seconds matter. According to the American Heart Association, the chance of survival decreases by up to 10% for every minute where you go without defibrillation. And a lot of the calls that we go on, even though I'm not EMS, are to assist with cardiac arrest. And you do see this a lot. I can speak from personal experience where we had a tough time locating a call in a strip mall because we were just given the general address. In reality, it's at one end of the strip mall versus the other. That only might be 30, 40, 50 seconds difference, but like, again, that can make a huge difference in the outcome. So here's a little example of sub-addressing. So this is a a layout of the South Park Mall in Charlotte. Anybody who's from that area should be familiar with the South Park Mall. Very busy area. Let's say you have a call. What's your emergency? You're calling 911. Someone's having a heart attack at the Foot Locker in South Park Mall. Okay, so the call taker is going to take the information based off the current data that's available through E911. They're going to try and locate as best they can. They're going to route the appropriate emergency responders and ambulance. That ambulance, if they just don't know exactly where to go, they don't have all that location information, they might come down a certain path, walk into the mall a certain way. Could it have been a better route? Could there have been a different way if they had more information? They would have come in from a different road, maybe gone into a different entrance into that mall. For those folks who are familiar with this area, these roads, specifically Fairview Road, I used to work across the street from here, heavily trafficked. There's a lot of streetlights, which I'm not showing here. That could all add time. Even with lights and sirens, you'd be surprised how difficult it is to get through to your calls. We've literally driven on the other side of the streets, on curbs, on sidewalks, and still it can take time. So if we had a different route, maybe we could come down Barclay and boom, come right in that way, and actually enter into a different location in the mall, because we know exactly where the Foot Locker is, because each of those storefronts or stores in the mall would have their own address point. So again, it's the locating the incident. That sub-address information for large complexes can be vital because it can improve the dispatch and also the routing, where one route could be significantly shorter than the other. As I said, seconds matter. So this is probably one of the most important slides, and I try not to have a lot of text, but this is one, if you're going to screenshot something, and we'll share our presentation out later, it's this would be the one to focus on. Getting the sub-address information takes effort. It takes time. You have to really get to know your stakeholders at the local level. And here's just a small list that we've come in contact with our projects: police, fire, public works, zoning code enforcement, your voter registration. If you have someone who's connected, who has a connection to the United States Postal Service, they are the best boots on the ground because they're touching those sub-addresses and sub-addresses every day, more than most anybody else. Your utilities, either if it's public or private, they're going to have premise locations. They have to send a bill somewhere, real important. Obviously your alley, your housing authority. In some of your larger communities, you might have public housing. They know all of their unit information. They often have floor plans for that stuff. Your tax board is going to have parcel information, and then property managers at your larger locations, they should have an idea of what they're managing. One of the things is you have to get these people talking to you and then with each other. Many local departments still operate independently in silos, especially in your smaller towns and municipalities. And what we found is very beneficial is to hold workshops. Obviously with COVID, it's been a little bit challenging, but when you can get people face-to-face in a room, you'd be surprised the conversations that happen. We actually had one literally where the folks from the zoning office who were managing inspection data and the fire marshal were in the same room, and they did not realize, the fire marshal did not realize that the zoning folks had a level of information that he could use for his pre-planning. So not only will you foster these conversations for the benefit of the site addressing, the sub-addressing for the addressing point layer for 911, but you're going to help create that engagement within the community itself and in the departments, which will only help you better in the end. Also, we utilize online surveys to try and get more information in detail, especially when we're dealing with counties. A lot of times we coordinate or contract with a county, but we have to then coordinate with the local municipalities too, because they have a lot of the information that we still need. Again, making those connections between them. You have to stay connected. It requires a lot of effort in terms of maybe emails, calls, but be patient. These municipalities and these local stakeholders are swamped normally. And now with COVID, it creates an extra layer of stuff they have to deal with. So you have to be patient with them, and you might not get that information exactly when you want, but it will come. So again, once you get this information, what do we use GIS then, right? That's the beauty of it. It allows us to overlay data to look for patterns. And what's interesting is some of the data that is in tabular form oftentimes has either a parcel ID or an address tied to it. So you can always turn that into spatial data. Or if it's just in a tabular format that's maybe in a PDF, you can still use it for lookup tools, lookup references, and then provide that information in the map, identifying and looking for those patterns. Eventually, you'll see as multiple layers tell the same story, it gives you a higher degree of confidence that that sub-address point exists. There is one thing I forgot to mention in the previous slide. There is no easy button for sub-addresses. These are usually data points that are spread across different data sources, and you have to cast that wide net to be able to capture all of them. And here, when you overlay the different data sets that you have, that's when the patterns kind of come alive. So this scenario of stakeholder coordination is actually something that happened for us in Montgomery County, that large county in Pennsylvania that I was talking to you about. We had a large complex of townhouses and apartments, and we actually were going to do our field visit just to drive around and see what we could ascertain to verify. And there's the leasing office. So we went into the leasing office, and they have actually a floor plan map, or a complex map, if you will. If you can see, though, the buildings have the numbers on them. This one, in this case, is 100 Cypress Court, building C. When you drive up to the building, it'll tell you the unit numbers. It'll say unit 100 to 300, but you don't know all those unit numbers. You don't know where exactly they're at. And with COVID, we couldn't just walk in there. So we got to talking through our stakeholder coordination. We found that the municipal was tracking inspection data. So this is the same property, 100 Cypress Court. You can see they're starting to list the apartment numbers, the rentals, and you have the PIN numbers and everything that's associated with that. And this is Westfield 41 is the actual complex that these apartments are in, which is great. You always want to try to trust but verify. And if you can have multiple data sources, that's going to really increase your confidence interval here. And fortunately for us, we also had the US Postal Service carrier sheets. This might be a little hard for you to see, but if you can zoom in, or you can take my word for it though. This right here represents, this highlighted is Cypress Court. Again, it lists the apartment. So the carrier sheets are actually, and they're not always easy to get your hands on. It really requires having really good coordination with the Postal Service. At least in my part of the country, I'm in the Philadelphia area now. The carrier routes are listed in these sheets, and they're by carrier. So if you have multiple carriers, you'll have multiple sheets for your town or municipality. What they do is they actually list the street. Then they have this thing called this note called the secondary abbreviation. That's their term for a unit. So APT, apartment. And then they have the unit numbers. So we were able to coincide the municipal data with the Postal Service data, so that we could have that degree of confidence, and then add those points to each of these buildings to accurately represent the subunit or the sub-address points within that. Rather than just having 1 point for the building, we now had 200 to 300. I would prefer to do this live, but things can always go wrong with Murphy's Law is always in when you have a live demo. So I'm just doing screenshots. But again, that's the point of bringing this all together, so you can get those address points into your GIS. Another example in finding the patterns visually. So this is a screenshot from ArcGIS Pro. And what we have here is the parcel layer, and we have it symbolized in two different manners. The first is where you see the purple hatch lines going across with a no fill, and that's basically symbolized off of the parcels tax land use codes. Also, so you can see where we have those. In some cases, you're looking for that overlap. The other parcel symbolization is based off of municipal data that comes from their inspection group in the Department of Public Works and their code enforcement. They maintain a separate database from the tax. And in theirs, they are actually monitoring and going in to track the amount of occupants in there. So you can see some patterns happening. You're looking ideally for where you have the hatch plus a colored polygon, because that shows you consistency between the two data sets. You notice though, right here, in the number, by the way, is the label for the amount of units that the code enforcement believes that they have occupants for that parcel. So in some cases, like this bright yellow, the tax code does not list that as a multi-unit. In some cases, you have it where the tax code listed as a multi-unit, but the code enforcement folks don't see that being in a place where there might be multi-units. Those discrepancies are just as valuable as when you have the matches, because that can show you that there's possibilities that maybe there's some data missing. Maybe your tax data is off. Maybe you have to go and inspect something. You might have even possibly illegal apartments. So there's actually other opportunities for extra value add when you do this analysis. So in this parcel right here, you can see that the land use code is for a commercial 3-story or less, low rise, 5 to 10 units. And then when you so that is more of like a rule of thumb. It doesn't necessarily guarantee you that there's multi-units there, but that's what the property has its land use code for. When you come back and you overlay, then for the same, you can see that the prop ID, which is basically the parcel ID, the last 4 digits, 2182, matches 2182. Here you can see the level of detail that the zoning folks and the code enforcement folks have. They're listing the floor, the apartment number, this data set was actually very, very detailed, room number and the different types here. So we use this again, this information on top of each other to identify where those, where you have those similarities and where you can then say, yes, we have a high degree of confidence that we can add 4 more additional address points here, because normally, even with your alley, you might only have 1 point here on your address point layer. In reality, you have 5 separate unique addresses. And that's kind of the level of detail that we are going through with our projects. So one of the results from that example was in Reading, Pennsylvania. And here's a quick snapshot of all the address points. About 26,000, and it's a small city in Pennsylvania. About 80 to 90,000 population. What was important here that I thought was unique is that there was 28,000 alley records. So if you took the alleys and you basically removed the dupes and you had unique values for each property that was unique. In some cases that had some subunit information. And that gave you relatively a 98% match rate to your center lines. But when we got through our project, we added the yellow points, which was an additional 10,000 sub-address points. Which was an increase of almost 50%. And we also verified an additional 5,000 addresses and we provided unit details for them. Though what's important about that, there's a couple things. Those are 10,000 address points that were not in the system before, that now we can put into the system to expedite those emergency, those 911 calls, to get those emergency responders out there quicker and more efficiently. The other important thing is I know through, with the 911 board and the great tools they put in place with the data hub, the big focus is on the alley records, comparing to the alley records. And I just want to let you know that you sometimes might have a great match to your alley, but there's some devil in the details there. And you have to kind of go into your data a little more and do some additional checks to make sure that your alley, or if you're checking against your alley, that you're representing these sub-address points. And that's really just a matter of how accurate your alley is and what kind of checks you're using, but just be aware of it and know that, you know, this is a project here where we ended up adding a significant amount of sub-address points with our checks. So you can take this one step further. One of the projects we worked on is at Baltimore BWI's airport. So it's one thing to kind of look through towns and sub-addresses, but when you have a large complex like an airport, what does that mean for sub-addressing? Here's the normal map. There's, I think, several terminals. And when you overlay, and what we've added is the address points for all the different stores and rooms, and not necessarily rooms, but just areas where they would require the sub-address points for. I was able to get permission to share this, but I can't share too much of the detail. But the point is that they added over 2,100 subunits were added in this project and that are actively maintained. We actually maintain these for Baltimore. What's interesting here is, and this is a little bit of a twist, some of them are kiosks. So when you run through the airport, you notice that you have maybe that sunglass stand or whatever. Those are temporary locations. And so you have to manage, how do you manage a temporary location? This is more for your indoor use, but regardless, how do you manage an temporary location with your sub-addressing? They've developed a permitting process that allows for checks and balances. And it also requires some routine updating, because you'd hate for the 911 system to have that location in one spot in reality when it's in another one. But again, the idea of sub-addressing can be applied from the local level all the way down to these large complexes at something like an airport, and the mall examples that we showed before. So I wanted to take that time to make sure that I went through all that. But if anybody has additional questions, I didn't want to dive too much into the details and make this too much of a GIS heavy presentation, but I'm glad to speak to you more at our booth. we can talk more about our projects or talk more about the projects that you may be working on. I know a lot of you are already pretty far along with your I3 ready data sets, but if you had more questions about what we did and also things that some guidance for you, be happy to talk to you. And also, we are contracted in North Carolina to offer IT service, GI services as well. Also, you can sign up for periodic updates through this bit link here. And I do appreciate the time. And Catherine, I think we're ahead of schedule here a little bit. Do I have anything in the chat? Because I cannot seem to pull it up for some reason.
There are no questions in the chat right now.
Okay. All right, then yeah, I can't. I lost it, Catherine, somehow. Sorry. But I hope, again, in closing, I hope that it gave you a little bit unique, different view of some of the other presentations you've seen already today or over the conference regarding 911. And just be safe out there and just work hard. You're doing a great job of getting your address points in. I've worked on different states, worked in different states with 911 addressing for next gen, and North Carolina they're far ahead many states, and you should be proud of the effort that you're all doing. Catherine, if anything else, I think we could probably.
Can you share the link again for people to write down and use?
Yeah, let me go back here. There you go.
Press the play button at the top. Okay, so it does start from the beginning. So press escape again and go to the very bottom. And I wonder if you right click on it. Oh, there it is.
Perfect. I think that was all the questions. Thank you everyone for attending the Next Gen 911 Mind the Gap Identifying Missing Sub Addresses Vendor Demo Theater. You